So I took a quick look to see. It looks like they have a couple guys coming in, kind of some upperclassmen. I think they had a quarterback coming in, and they had a tight end who had some pretty good career stats. I think Hubbard might have been his name, but can you kind of run us through kind of what Hawaii, what their 2021 outlook was, and then kind of just roll into their, off-season recruiting and kind of talk about their hopes for this upcoming season?
I'm not gonna lie, there are not many programs in college football that are probably had a worse offseason than Hawaii. Hawaii had the Todd Graham situation go on where there was a hearing in the Hawaii State Senate about his alleged mistreatment of players in the program, and they had all these hearings released and all of that, and it ended up with a mutual dismissal of Todd Graham, and they hired their former quarterback, local legend Timmy Chang, and he's going to be the head coach now of Hawaii. So that should stir some excitement. But this Senate hearing came right after a mass exodus of transfers from the program, and Hawaii lost almost all of its key contributors from last year, from its quarterback Siobhan Cordero, who's now going to be San Jose State's quarterback. All their best defenders, their cornerback Cameron Lockridge went to Fresno State. Darius Muasau, their star linebacker, went to UCLA. Jordan Laulu went to Oklahoma on the defensive line. Hawaii just had so many guys last year. Nick Mardner, one of their best receivers, went to Cincinnati. Just a mass exodus of transfers where the team's so inexperienced at this point. They didn't bring that many in, that this is going to be a team that I do not think has high or lofty expectations for 2022. This is a complete rebuilding year for Hawaii. They're probably not going to win more than 3 games, and I think you'll see a lot of struggles this year. Last year's Hawaii team, they had a pretty good passing offense. They also were a little benefits of a weak schedule. They had 6 wins. 3 of them were an FCS team, and they got to play New Mexico State twice. So they got to pad 2 wins there. And the offense really came around at the end of the season, and they won their last 2 regular season games. But their Hawaii Bowl against Memphis was canceled due to a COVID outbreak in the Hawaii locker room. So we never got to see how Hawaii would have done in that bowl game. So Hawaii in 2021 was a solid team. They had a lot of defensive issues, which were magnified in week 0 against UCLA and persisted throughout the year. They were even evident in that 50-45 win over Colorado State on rivalry weekend. But when Hawaii lost so many of its talented defenders, and just last year alone, there was Corey Bethley, their star safety, who has transferred. He had 5 interceptions, one of the top in the nation. Darius Muasau, who I mentioned earlier, had 5 forced fumbles, which was also top 10 in the country. He was a team leader in sacks, tackles for loss, just dominated from all areas as a pass rusher. Cortez Davis, another a member of the secondary that they're losing this year. I think he went to the NFL. So Hawaii is just a completely different defense this year. And offensively, they're going to have to pick up the pieces and build around Braden Shager. Shager was a quarterback who led that monumental, surprising win over Fresno State last year, where Jake Hayner just threw a ton of interceptions, and Hawaii came out victorious due to the turnover margin. And then and then their other key returners, I think, Dedrick Parson was their second leading rusher last year. And one of their receivers, Zion Bowens, he had a 93-yard reception in one of those late season wins, I remember. So they don't have that many pieces from last year to build around, and this team, it's going to be a struggle for them.
Steve, I love statistical oddities. Anytime there's some kind of strange statistic or number that doesn't make sense or is way out of the norm, I kind of latch onto it. So I was looking up Hawaii's schedule just now because I had recalled their bowl situation last year. Well, they still went 6-7. They played one more game than everybody else. They must enjoy playing football in Hawaii, because last year they played a 6-7 season. So they played 13 games without a conference championship game. Then wasn't it a couple years ago, they played 15 games. They went 10-5 a couple years ago, Steve, I remember.
In 2019, they were in the Mountain West Championship game against Boise State. So yeah, they went 10-5.
They played 14 regular season games.
Hawaii plays an extra game every year to make up for travel revenue.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yes.
Then they tacked down another one a couple of years ago. I just think it's funny. They went 10-5 a few years ago.
Yeah, they played the full college football playoff schedule. I remember that. That was a controversial Christmas Eve win over BYU. I think it was due to a fumble call near the goal line, and they beat that Zach Wilson BYU team with Cole McDonald in the Hawaii Bowl. But yeah, that Hawaii team was pretty good, went 10-5. Good offense. I loved watching Cole McDonald play at Hawaii. He really revived that program after they had a pretty substandard mid-2010s.
Now, I think this is also kind of strange, but I don't know what else they would do to reward Hawaii players for making postseason play. But every time they make a bowl game, practically, they stay at home and play in their home stadium for a bowl game. So this is, you can go year after year after year after year, and this is Hawaii's plight. They stay at home and play in a bowl game. It seems kind of like everybody else is looking to go somewhere to play in a bowl game. They play in their home stadium, but then again, they're in Hawaii. Do they really need to go anywhere else?
Yeah, that's also for travel costs. In the pandemic season, they played in the New Mexico Bowl, which occurred that year in Frisco, Texas. So that was
you were there, weren't you?
No, I was not.
You didn't go to that one?
Since Colt Brennan led the team to the to the Sugar Bowl in 2007, every single bowl game they played, except for the pandemic season, was in the Hawaii Bowl. So they're pretty much a lock for that bowl game if they qualify for eligibility. And that's usually one of the first bids that are announced, too.
That's got to be such a difficult travel just arrangement to, like, before you guys had hopped on, I was talking about, the Michigan-Hawaii game in week 2. And my thought was like, well, like, I know that's not going to be a night game. So let's say it's a 3:00 kick. I mean, I didn't do the math on it, but that's got to be what, 10 a.m. probably earlier for Hawaii. Like, that's just it's tough. Number one, with the travel, you're just going. I mean, I would call it cross country, even though they're not in the like continental U.S., but they're flying cross country. And then on top of it, you're playing most times just such an early time than what your body is used to and what these guys are probably typically practicing at.
I think it was a noon game when they played in 2016 at the Big House. Michigan won 63-3. Just ridiculous box score I'm looking at right now. Chris Evans basically just went off for a huge gain every time he touched the ball. The quarterbacks combined 17 of 20, Wilton Spate, Shane Morris, and John O'Korn.
They weren't awake yet.
Yeah. Michigan just absolutely decimated Hawaii in 2016 when they last played.
Ooh, yeah, that's just difficult. It's a tough deal, and and then also, how do you manage that? Like some teams, if you're gonna have a late game, like an 8 p.m. game, sometimes coaches will change the practice time. So instead of practicing from 4 to 6 every week like we usually do, we'll practice 8 to 10 p.m. right, to get our bodies used to it that week. You can't just say we're gonna practice from 10 to 12. I mean, some guys have class. Like, it's just a weird dynamic to have to work around with Hawaii. It's so weird.
It's a 6-hour difference.
Jeez.
So they're playing at 6 a.m. in the morning for them.
Ugh,
travel is such an underrated part of sports. Does travel? Draymond Green was talking about it with that Warriors Grizzlies series, that he has to play a game, hop on a 4.5-hour flight, and then you play like the very next day, and that can be a lot of very exhausting in like that 7-game series. So we're seeing the same thing with Hawaii. They have to do this like every week of the regular season if they alternate home and road games. So it's crazy. I mean, the program's at such a disadvantage, which makes you really appreciate that 2007 team even more, the one that qualified for the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, because in basketball and the NBA, I mean, you just think in your mind, well, it's the Western Conference, so yeah, it'll be it's a quick flight. It's like no, Memphis, Tennessee to San Francisco is not a quick flight. Now, Boston, Philly, that's something totally different. And We got who's in the East, Boston and Miami. I mean, even that is that's a decent amount of travel. I mean, you're not, switching time zones, but nonetheless, that's still a pretty decent, flight that you have to take after 8 p.m. game. So you end at what, midnight, 1 o'clock? You got to shower, fly. So that gets just magnified when you're, flying from Hawaii to Michigan. That just, ugh, I couldn't. And then, what if stuff gets lost? I just, in my mind, I think of so many logistics that could just mess this whole thing up and just make the travel even worse. Yeah, I don't envy those guys, but yes, kudos to that 2007 team. Colt Brennan was lighting it up, and Timmy Chang did too for his for not for nothing. He threw for a ton of yards. They were in the gosh, who was that air raid coach that June Jones?
June Jones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So is he the USFL or XFL? I think he's around somewhere. He's still kicking and still throwing it everywhere.
Is he? Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Atlanta Falcons.
Ooh, okay.
That's how Timmy Chang got his coaching career started, was a grad assistant at SMU when June Jones was there.
Nice. Perfect. Okay.
I remember when June Jones was playing. So
I didn't even know
Calling
June Jones
myself out, I
played
know.
football.
yeah, he was a quarterback for the Falcons.
Okay.
Before he was a coach for the Falcons, head coach for the Falcons.
Oh, that is interesting. I'll roll through a couple questions here. So, random fun fact, but last chance use own Dior Scott. Now I saw he's on the roster. Is he still? Looks like he's still there at Hawaii. He was at Laney College in California, I think, and then went over to Hawaii. So I thought that was cool. I watched Last Chance U. I liked it more with football. I don't know why. Maybe just I don't know. Maybe because I'm a bigger football fan than basketball, but it was pretty good. Did either one of you guys get a chance to check out any of those Last Chance U's?
I have not seen it.
Sorry, Des. I thought maybe Steve could pick you up on that one.
No.
That is okay. That is okay.
Certainly heard a lot about it. Maybe I should check it out.
Yeah, it's you've gotta go into it with an open mind of knowing what you're getting ready to see. I think it sheds some light on the JUCO kind of experience. It's very different than what you would ideally think of when you're talking about like a Power 5 team, like the first couple seasons was like a nicer JUCO. Like it was a place where they had 6 and 7 different jersey combinations, like really nice stuff. Well, as they started going to different JUCOs, you could see a different side of it where they didn't have that kind of stuff, and it was interesting. The last season they did football. It was a JUCO that didn't have any dorms, so you had guys that had to figure out their own like housing and things like that, and it wasn't a great situation for most of those guys. So they really had to kind of grind it out to try to get to that next level. And unfortunately, you see guys who are just who mess up the controllables, like the things that you can control with your attitude, your effort, being where you're supposed to be at the time you're supposed to be there, things like that, where it's just like, oh man, but it was interesting though. It was interesting as a guy who could not play that level of football. It was kind of cool to see some of those guys.